My mother never called just to check on me. Every single time her name lit up my screen, there was something she needed. So when she called on a Tuesday afternoon in early December, I already knew before I answered. Maya. Her voice carried that particular softness she reserved for requests she knew I'd resist. I'm so glad I caught you. I set down my stylus and leaned back in my chair. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, which my family has always translated to mean I have unlimited time and no real obligations. Hey, Mom, what's going on? Your father and I have been talking. A pause. Derek found this incredible New Year's cruise deal. 7 nights, the Caribbean, the whole family. My chest tightened. I waited. We leave December 28th. We'd be back January 4th. I already knew where this was going, but I asked anyway. That sounds fun. Who's going? Well, your father and me, Derek and Renee, and the kids. Another pause, longer this time. We were hoping you could stay with Grandpa. There it was. I pressed my fingers to the bridge of my nose. Mom, that's 8 days over New Year's. I know, sweetheart, but you work from home. It's not like you'd have to take time off. And Grandpa's been having a harder time lately. Dr. Prentice says his tremors have gotten worse. We just don't feel comfortable leaving him alone. Then don't leave him. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Maya, please don't be dramatic. This cruise was a special gift from Derek. He bought the tickets for everyone. It's a family trip. Everyone except me. Well, someone has to be responsible. She said it so matter-of-factly, like responsibility was simply my assigned role in this family and always had been. You've always had the most patience with him. You're the one he listens to. I stared at the half-finished logo on my screen. I had 3 client deadlines in the first week of January. I had plans to spend New Year's Eve with my best friend Jess, our annual tradition of bad movies and good wine. I had a life that apparently didn't register as real to the people who raised me. I need to think about it, I said. Of course. But the trip is in 3 weeks, so... She let that hang in the air like a deadline. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment for a long time. My grandfather's Parkinson's diagnosis had come 18 months earlier. In the beginning, it had been manageable, some tremors, some balance issues, medications that seemed to keep things relatively stable. But over the past several months, according to my family, things had deteriorated significantly. He'd been living with my parents since the diagnosis. They had turned the downstairs guest room into his suite and spoken at length about how challenging it all was, how exhausting, how they never got a break. And yet somehow, every school break, every long weekend, every holiday, I found myself driving 45 minutes to their house to take over. Because I worked from home, because I had more flexibility, because I was the one he listened to. What they never said, but what lived in the air of every conversation, was that I was the only one without a husband, without kids, without what they considered real responsibilities. My independence was treated like a vacancy sign. I called Jess that night. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. You already know what you want to do, she said when I finished. I know I don't want to spend New Year's changing medication schedules while my family posts sunset photos from the deck of a cruise ship. So say no. It's not that simple with them. It is exactly that simple, she said. You just don't believe it yet. I spent the next 2 days rehearsing the conversation in my head. When my father called because my mother always sends my father when she senses resistance, I was ready. Maya, your mother tells me you're still thinking things over. His voice was measured, reasonable. My father has always been the more diplomatic enforcer. I want you to know we genuinely appreciate everything you do for this family. Then respect that I have my own plans for New Year's, Dad. Of course. But this is Grandpa we're talking about. He needs consistency. He needs someone who knows his routine. Then cancel the cruise. A brief silence. We've already paid for everything. Derek put a lot of effort into planning this. And I put a lot of effort into my own life, which apparently matters less. That's not fair. No, I said. What's not fair is being voluntold to spend 8 days alone on a holiday because everyone else has a partner and I don't. I'll come by on the 28th to say goodbye. That's it. My father sighed the sigh of a man recalculating. All right, Maya. If that's your decision, I just hope you won't regret it. He gave in too easily. I noticed it immediately, that slight deflation in his voice that didn't quite match the stakes. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I had finally done it. Finally held a line with my family, and I should feel proud instead of suspicious. For the next 3 weeks, no one brought it up again. It felt like a small miracle. I finished 2 of my 3 client projects early, made plans with Jess for New Year's, and let myself believe that something had shifted. The morning of December 28th, I packed a small bag of things Grandpa liked, the dark chocolate he wasn't supposed to eat but always did, a paperback western, the wool socks he always said the house was too cold without. Just a morning visit, I told myself. Say goodbye, check in, be home by noon. I pulled into my parents' driveway at 10:30. Both cars were gone. Derek's SUV, gone. The house sat quiet in the thin winter light. I stood on the front porch for a moment, bag in hand, telling myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe they'd left early for the port. Maybe they'd gone to pick something up. I rang the doorbell and heard slow, shuffling steps from inside. The door opened and there was Grandpa in his cardigan and slippers, blinking in the pale December sun. Maya. His face broke into a genuine smile. You came. Of course I came. I hugged him carefully, the way I'd learned to since his diagnosis, mindful of his balance. Where is everybody? He stepped back to let me in. They left about an hour ago. I walked into the kitchen. On the counter was a printed sheet of paper medication schedule, emergency contacts, a note that said casserole in fridge. Enough for 3 days. We'll be back Jan 4. You're the best, honey. Love, Mom. A smiley face at the end. I read it twice. They had left. They had left. And they had left this note, because they had fully expected me to show up and stay. My father's easy capitulation on the phone suddenly made sense. They hadn't accepted my no. They had simply waited for me to walk into the trap myself. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. It rang 4 times. Maya, you made it. How's Grandpa? The fury in my chest was so hot I had to breathe before I spoke. What is this note? Mom, we left everything you'd need. The casserole is labeled by day. I told you I was coming for the morning. I told Dad I wasn't staying. You left a care plan for 8 days. Sweetheart, you were already going to be there. It just made sense. You lied to me. My voice dropped very low. You knew I said no. You pretended to accept it, and you left anyway because you knew I'd show up and feel too guilty to leave him alone. You're being very dramatic right now. I want you to come back. Maya, we're already on the highway. Then turn around. A long pause. Grandpa needs someone with him. You're already there. I don't understand why you're making this so difficult. You're a good person. Good people don't abandon family. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that for one terrible moment I almost felt ashamed. Then I looked up and saw Grandpa standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me with an expression I'd never quite seen on him before. Not confused, not distressed. Still, alert. Almost like he was waiting for something. If you're not back within the hour, I said, I'm calling Adult Protective Services and reporting that Grandpa was left alone without consent of his caregiver. My mother's voice shifted. You absolutely would not. Try me. 1 hour. I hung up. I stood in the kitchen holding my phone, shaking slightly. Grandpa moved to the small table by the window and sat down slowly. He folded his hands on the table. Come sit with me, he said. I sat across from him. Something in his voice was different. Clear in a way I hadn't heard in months. Maya, he said, I owe you an explanation. I looked at him. Grandpa, you don't have to. I do. He met my eyes steadily. I want you to listen to everything before you react. I nodded. He took a slow breath. My tremors are real. The Parkinson's is real. But the progression your parents have been describing to justify keeping me dependent that's been exaggerated, significantly. When I had a bad week in October, I let them believe it was the new normal, and then I kept letting them believe it. I stared at him. What? I wanted to see. His voice was quiet and deliberate. I wanted to see what they would do with it, how they would use it. I wanted to see how they would treat you. My throat tightened. Grandpa, I've watched them put you last for years. Since you were a teenager, you've been the one who stayed, the one who sacrificed, the one who adjusted her life to fit whatever was convenient for everyone else. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself families work things out. He paused. But then I watched them turn my diagnosis into a tool, and you into a free service, and I stopped telling myself it wasn't my business. How long have you been planning this? 3 months. He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out his phone, something he'd claimed to struggle operating for most of the past year. He slid it across the table. I've been recording conversations. In this kitchen, in the living room, at the dinner table. Every time they discussed your role. Every time they talked about what they'd ask of you next, and how they'd frame it. I picked up the phone and scrolled through a list of audio files. Dozens of them, neatly dated. There's one from November, he said, where your mother and Derek discuss exactly how to word things so you'd feel too guilty to say no to the cruise arrangement. Your father suggests saying my tremors were getting worse to make the ask feel more urgent. He said it simply, without drama, which somehow made it worse. I also made an appointment with my attorney 6 weeks ago. My will has been updated. I set the phone down. Grandpa, you don't need to. I want to. His eyes were clear and serious. Your Aunt Linda's beach property on the Cape, the investment accounts from your grandmother, the house in Ashford that's been rented out for 12 years. Those have been updated. To you, the room felt very still. They've been managing my finances under the assumption that things would stay as written, he said. They are no longer written that way. My attorney drafted everything with documentation of the recordings and a current cognitive assessment confirming I'm making this decision with full understanding. It's not contestable. I didn't know what to say. I sat across from my grandfather, this man I'd spent years driving to doctor's appointments and sitting with on Sunday afternoons, and felt something in my chest break open in a way that wasn't entirely painful. Now, he said, with a small, quiet smile, I believe your mother has about 45 minutes left on her hour. My mother didn't turn around. She texted instead. We've already merged onto 95. Grandpa has everything he needs. Please don't be selfish, Maya. We'll talk when we're home. I read it 3 times. Then I picked up my bag, made sure Grandpa had everything he needed for the next few hours, and drove home. I spent that afternoon going through Grandpa's recordings on my laptop. He'd airdropped them all to me before I left. I listened to my mother explaining to Derek that I never had anything going on anyway and that she'll complain but she'll do it. She always does. I listened to my father saying they should let the doctor's appointment slide this week because Maya can handle it. I listened to my sister-in-law joke that having me around was basically free home health care. I built a timeline. I screenshotted texts they'd sent me over the past 18 months. I pulled up emails. I organized everything into a folder. Then I opened Facebook and wrote a post. This New Year's I was supposed to spend with my best friend. Instead, I showed up at my parents' house for what I was told was a quick visit, and found everyone already gone on a cruise with a printed care plan for my grandfather on the counter, fully expecting me to stay for 8 days without my consent. This is after I explicitly said no. This is the 3rd holiday in a row this has happened. I am my grandfather's unofficial, unpaid, unasked caregiver because I work from home and don't have a spouse. I've spent 18 months managing his medications, his doctor visits, his daily care, while my family takes vacations and calls it family responsibility. I want to be very clear. I love my grandfather deeply. I do not consent to being volunteered for his care without my agreement, or manipulated into it through guilt and false framing. Family does not mean one person absorbs all the sacrifice while everyone else lives freely. I put my phone face down on my desk and went to make coffee. When I picked it back up 20 minutes later, there were 43 comments. Jess had commented within minutes. I'm so proud of you. This has been a long time coming. Below that, a flood of strangers. People sharing their own versions of the same story, people tagging friends, people writing paragraphs about being the designated caregiver in their own families, the daughter who stayed, the one without a partner who was therefore available. By midnight, the post had been shared over 2,000 times. I did not sleep well, not because I regretted it, because I knew what was coming. My mother called 11 times before 8 in the morning. I let them all go to voicemail. The texts started shortly after, from her, from my father, from Derek, eventually from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. The general consensus among my family was that I had humiliated them publicly over a misunderstanding, that I was unstable, that I had always been difficult, that posting private family matters online was a form of betrayal that couldn't be forgiven. My mother posted her own response. She didn't name me, but anyone who knew us knew exactly who she meant. She wrote that her daughter had abandoned an elderly man with a degenerative illness over the holidays out of selfishness, and that it broke her heart to see how little some people valued family. The comments on her post were brutal. Strangers I'd never meet called me cold, ungrateful, a disgrace. My hands were shaking when I screenshotted everything. Then something unexpected happened. A journalist who wrote a column about elder care and family dynamics found my original post. She reached out through Facebook Messenger. She'd written before about caregiver burnout and the invisible labor shouldered disproportionately by single women in families. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak with her, on the record, with a pseudonym if I preferred. Within a week, the piece was published. It wasn't just about me. I was one of several anonymous voices in a larger story about what she called volunteer caregivers, adult children assigned to elder care roles without consent or compensation. But the details were specific enough that people in my life recognized them immediately. My family's response was swift and vicious. My father called me emotionally volatile and said my accusations were exaggerated for attention. Derek posted that his sister had always had a flair for drama and that the truth was far more nuanced than I was presenting. Renee, his wife, commented on a mutual friend's post that I'd been jealous of their family vacation and manufactured a crisis to ruin it. Then my mother made the mistake of writing, in a public comment thread, that my grandfather's condition was more advanced than I was acknowledging, and that my neglect of him during the holiday was being investigated. That was a lie. A specific, provable, public lie. I called Grandpa that evening. He listened quietly and said, "Call a lawyer, Maya. Tomorrow morning, I'll cover the retainer." The attorney I found, a woman named Diane who specialized in family law and elder abuse cases, sat across from me in a conference room and read through everything I'd brought: the recordings, the screenshots, the texts, the timeline. She was quiet for a long time when she finished. "Your mother's claim that you neglected your grandfather is factually false and demonstrably so," she said. "Combined with the scope of the public statements made about your character, you have a viable defamation case. The pattern of coercion around caregiving could also support an emotional distress claim." She set the papers down. "Before we go that route, I'll send a formal cease and desist. Sometimes that's enough." It was not enough. When my mother received the letter, she posted about it. She wrote that her own daughter was threatening to sue her for asking for help with a sick relative, that this was what the world had come to, that she'd done nothing but love me and give me everything, and that the legal threat was the cruelest thing a child could do to a parent. Derek called me from a number I didn't recognize to tell me I was dead to him. My father sent an email measured, precise, devastating in its coldness, explaining that I had always been the dramatic one, the difficult one, the one who made everything harder than it needed to be, and that my behavior over the past month had confirmed what the family had long suspected. He said I needed professional help. He said if I proceeded with any legal action, they would countersue. I forwarded the email to Diane and told her to file. The case took 9 months. My grandfather testified. He sat in that courtroom, steady and clear-voiced, and walked through 18 months of documented exploitation with a precision that made the other side's attorney visibly uncomfortable. He played 3 of the recordings. He submitted the medical assessment confirming his cognitive clarity. He explained, calmly and without bitterness, that his family had used his diagnosis as a mechanism to extract free labor from his granddaughter while misrepresenting his condition to her and to others. The social media posts were entered into evidence. The comments, the public statements about my neglect, the email from my father, the texts from Derek. The judge ruled in my favor on the defamation claim and the intentional infliction of emotional distress. She ordered my mother and father and Derek and his wife to issue a public retraction and a court-approved apology. She awarded damages that I won't put a number to here, except to say that they were enough to matter. This court finds that the conduct exhibited by the defendants toward the plaintiff constituted a sustained pattern of manipulation, coercion, and public defamation, the judge said. The plaintiff's decision to decline an uncompensated caregiving role was entirely within her rights, and the family's response to that decision, including false public statements about neglect and the deliberate leveraging of an elder's medical condition to manufacture obligation, is not protected speech. I sat in that courtroom and felt the strange, hollow weight of being right in a way that costs everything. The aftermath moved quickly after the verdict. My father's firm, where he'd been a senior partner for over 2 decades, quietly asked him to step back after 2 major clients raised concerns following the case's local media coverage. He took a reduced role. He hasn't called me since the ruling, and I've stopped expecting him to. My mother resigned from the nonprofit board she'd sat on for 8 years. The community she'd carefully cultivated, neighborhood association, church committees, holiday charity drives, went cold around her with a speed that surprised even me. Derek and Renee's small property management business, which had been growing, hit a wall when several prospective tenants researched their names and found the case records. They listed their house in February and moved to a smaller rental in a suburb 40 minutes away. Derek sent me a single text, 3 months after the verdict. It said, "I hope you're satisfied." I read it once and deleted it. Grandpa moved in with me in October. We converted my second bedroom into a proper suite for him, wider door frames, grip bars in the bathroom, good lighting. He does his physical therapy in the mornings and sits in the window in the afternoons with a book. His tremors are there, real and present, but he manages them with appropriate medication and actual care, the kind that comes from someone who's there by choice. I won't pretend the grief isn't real. There are nights when I think about the version of my family I wanted them to be, and feel the loss of it like something physical. There are moments when I scroll past a holiday photo of strangers with their parents and feel something I can't quite name. The family I had was not the family I needed, and knowing that doesn't make the distance smaller. But I also have Grandpa at the dinner table making dry jokes about reality television. I have Jess on New Year's Eve with her terrible taste in movies. I have a client list I've spent 2 years building. I have the Cape House, which I drove up to see for the first time in November, standing in the gray Atlantic light with my grandfather beside me, both of us quiet for a long time. "Your grandmother and I spent every summer there for 30 years, he said finally. "I always meant for it to go to someone who'd love it." I looked at him. "You love it," he said simply. "I do. I don't know what I'll do with it yet. Maybe rent it, maybe spend summers there eventually, maybe something I haven't thought of. What I know is that it belongs to me because someone who loved me decided that what I'd given deserved to be returned. What I know is that saying no is a complete sentence, that choosing yourself is not the same as abandoning people, that the people who tell you selflessness is a virtue are very often the people who benefit from your self-erasure. I spent years being reliable in a way that cost me and cost me and cost me. I was the one without a husband, without kids, without in their accounting the kind of life that deserved protection. So I became the available one, the flexible one, the one who adjusted. What I didn't understand then and understand now, in a way I carry in my body, my life was never less than theirs. My time was never worth less. My holidays, my plans, my rest, none of that was lesser, because I hadn't organized it around a spouse or children. I just let them make me believe it was, because it was easier than the fight. The fight was worth it. Not the lawsuit, not the verdict, not the damages, though I won't lie and say those didn't matter. What was worth it was the morning after I filed the case, when I woke up and felt, for the first time in years, that I had taken my own life seriously. I would not make space for people who saw me as a resource. I would not shrink my plans to fit their convenience. I would not answer the phone already apologizing. Last week, I got an email from a woman I'd never met who said she'd read about the case and wanted to thank me. She wrote that she'd been the designated caregiver in her own family for 6 years. She wrote that reading what happened, the lawsuit, the verdict, the judge's words about coercion and obligation had given her language for something she'd been living without language for. She was in the process of setting her first real boundary with her siblings. She was terrified, she said, but she was doing it. I wrote back and told her what I know to be true. The terror doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it means you're exactly right, and the life you're protecting is worth every shaking hand. Grandpa was reading over my shoulder. When I hit send, he nodded once. "Good," he said, and went back to his book.